This is First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. On March 24, 2021, the doctor helped to celebrate Equal Pay Day by speaking about her first teaching job experience.
When I got my first teaching job, I was thrilled. After years of getting my degree in substitute teaching, I was finally going to be able to start the career that I had been dreaming about.
In 1976, Jill Biden was hired to be a full-time teacher at St. Mark's High, a Catholic school in Wilmington.
And then I found out that they were paying me only 75% of the man who was actually hired the same time.
Oh my God, call the equality police!
Why was my work worth less? We were working the same hours, teaching the same number of students, and had similar experience.
Ah, there it is. Similar experience. She and the man teacher worked the same hours and taught the same amount of students. But Dr. First Lady isn't going into further detail, so that's all we know that they had in common. But did they both teach the same subject? Did the man have additional valuable skills that she didn't? Did the man have more education? Maybe Jill Biden was offered less because at the time she only had a bachelor's degree, and maybe the man had his master's. Well, under the Equal Pay Act of 1963, none of those factors would be considered to be discriminatory. Also keep in mind that Jill Biden worked at a private school. Unlike public schools where first-year teachers are paid the same regardless of the subject they're teaching, private school salaries can vary. And that's because private schools and charter schools aren't forced to conform to the demands of the teachers' unions, which is the biggest reason why Democrats are so against their existence.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, neither can we, honey.
It wasn't just the money. Though that was unfair. It was the lack of respect, the discrimination.
But according to the Equal Pay Act of 1963, Jill Biden would have had to prove that the wage difference was based on gender. By selectively leaving out key details, she can say anything she wants about it and say that she was discriminated against because it fits her narrative on Equal Pay Day.
There are women who are still in the exact same position. It's one example of how we still treat women differently than men. And it's wrong.
If pay was the actual issue here, then why would the school bother hiring men at all? It's not like there's a shortage of female teachers. Only hire women, pay them a lower wage than men, be done with it. Anyway, Dr. First Lady wasn't the main attraction at the #Equal Pay Day event. It was Megan Rapinoe and Margaret Purse from the United States women's national soccer team, who were there for one reason: to speak about how oppressed they are. First, here's Midge.
The strength of unequal pay rests on the notion of unequal value. It is an issue of equity. When men began sports leagues, they were supported by billions in taxpayer subsidies.
Really? Billions? So you're telling me that when the NBA was started 74 years ago, when the NFL was started 100 years ago, and when Major League Baseball was started 118 years ago, they were supported by billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies? That is just straight up nonsense.
They were prioritized in media and afforded time to grow. The investment was great, and the return was great.
Yeah, a men's sports league has never failed, except for the ones that did, of course.
I have watched and joined a league of women who are remarkable at their craft. And together we have asked for the same grace that was extended to men in the formative years of their leagues. True investment.
Just because you heavily invest in anything doesn't mean that it's going to eventually be wildly successful. Case in point is Major League Soccer. It has the third highest attendance of any sport in the US behind football and baseball. And even though the league has existed since 1993 and investors are spending millions of dollars in league expansion fees, Major League Soccer they consistently lose money. In 2018, only 7 out of 30 teams made a profit. Compared to Major League Soccer, the women's national team bring in a fraction of the revenue. While the women are remarkable at their craft, it doesn't mean that people actually want to sit and watch it.
Often I'm resisted with declarations like, there just isn't enough interest in women's sports.
How do you explain the popularity of women's tennis then?
My response is always this: you would never expect a flower to bloom without water. But women in sport who have been denied water, sunlight, and soil are somehow expected to blossom. Invest in women, then let's talk again when you see the return.
Again, investing in a women's sports league is not a guarantee of success. I mean, look at the WNBA, which has been around for almost a quarter century. The league has an average net loss of $10 million every single year. And the only reason that they're able to pull that off is because they're subsidized by the NBA. So stop trying to make the WNBA happen. It's not gonna happen.
I've been devalued, I've been disrespected, and dismissed because I am a woman.
Says the pink-haired millionaire who plays soccer for a living and gets to have an Oval Office meeting with the President of the United States. Some might call that privilege.
Despite all the wins, I'm still paid less than men who do the same job that I do.
Again, it must be nice to say that kicking a ball into a net is your job, but whatever. So is Megan Rapinoe and the US women's national team really paid less than the men for doing the same job? Well, let's take a look. In April 2017, the women's team came to an agreement with the United States Soccer Federation. Under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement, the women's team contracts a guaranteed minimum of 20 players, each earning a base salary of $100,000 a year. On top of that, each player would receive a bonus for every friendlies game that they won, and they would receive a bonus for tie games as long as the team they were playing was FIFA ranked 8 or above. They would not receive a bonus for losses. The terms of the men's CBA is considerably different. Unlike the women, they don't receive a guaranteed base salary, but they do receive bonuses win, lose, or tie. And if a men's player doesn't play, they don't get paid. 2 years later, in March 2019, the US women's national team filed a class action lawsuit against the United States Soccer Federation. They alleged that they were being paid less than the men's national team because of discrimination, and that this was in violation of not only the Equal Pay Act, but also Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Beginning as early as 2012, and at various times thereafter, members of the women's national team, through their union, have demanded that the United States Soccer Federation offer women's national team players pay equal to pay afforded to men's national team players. These demands, however, have been rejected, and the Soccer Federation has paid and continues to pay the women's national team players less for comparable services than the Soccer Federation pays to male players on the men's national team. Except that the women's national team is, to put it bluntly, lying through their teeth. The women were offered the same pay structure as the men, and they turned it down, because they not only wanted the same bonuses that the men received, they also wanted the guaranteed base salary. On top of that, the women received benefits that were not afforded to the men, including severance benefits, salary continuation during periods of injury, medical, dental, and vision insurance, childcare, as well as airfare and hotel accommodation for the childcare providers. In May 2020, a judge for the U.S. District Court of the Central District of California found that since the women's team rejected the same performance-based pay structure as the men's team, that they didn't have a case.
Despite all the wins, I'm still paid less than men who do the same job that I do. For each trophy, of which there are many, and for each win, for each tie, and for each time that we play, it's less.
Nope. Under the pay structure that they negotiated, the women out-earned the men during the period between 2015 and 2019. During that time, the women's team played 111 total games and made $24 million overall, averaging over $220,000 per game. By contrast, the men's team played 87 total games and made $18.5 million overall, averaging over $212,000 per game. The court found that based on this evidence, it appears that the women's team did not make more money than the men's solely because they played more games. Rather, the women both played more games and made more money than the men per game. Yet the women's team argues that the US Soccer Federation was in violation of the Equal Pay Act because the bonuses they received were lower than the men's. But the court found that this approach ignores other benefits received by women's national team players, such as guaranteed annual salaries and severance pay, benefits that men's players do not receive. To consider these bonus provisions in isolation would run afoul of the Equal Pay Act, which expressly defines wages to include all forms of compensation, including fringe benefits. After the US District Court dismissed the equal pay claim, the women's team vowed to appeal, because feelings are more important than hard evidence or something. And that's when then presidential candidate Joe Biden chimed in on the matter. To US women's national team, don't give up this fight. This is not over yet. To the US Soccer Federation, equal pay now, or else when I'm president, you can go elsewhere for World Cup funding. Some might call that a threat. Well, a bad attempt at one anyway, since the federal government has nothing to do with providing World Cup funding. And 2 months later, completely ignoring the court's findings, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia introduced a bill to prohibit the use of federal funds to the World Cup unless the United States Soccer Federation provided equitable pay to the members of the women's and men's teams. But since the court found that the women actually make more per game than the men, the US Soccer Federation needs to make some adjustments so that the men make an equal amount. In fact, the best way to do this is to force the ladies to hand over their fair share to the men. Because #equal payday. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching, sharing, and slamming that like button. If you want a Clown World shirt, check out the link to my merch store in the description, and then maybe follow me on Twitter at Don't Walk Run and on Instagram at Don't Walk Run Productions. A special thanks to Poofy for her help with this week's video, and you can follow her on Twitter too. And again, thanks for tuning in, and as always, I hope to see you next time. If there is next time.